Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be part of this interesting discussion. I would like to talk about several important problems that Georgian media faced during the global pandemic. First problem for the Georgian media was the request of the public information. The first problematic decision when the government announced a state of emergency, which was end of March, was that the government halted terms for giving out the public information, which according to the current Georgian legislation is maximum 10 days. And this regulation included the possibility of receiving public information online too. So it completely halted the constitutional right to access the public information. However, even when the state of emergency was over, we still are having problems with the public info request because both us and our colleagues, we usually receive information very late. It could be months or more than months, or we don't receive it at all. So this was and still remains to be one of the main problems. Another problem is that it's been more than already nine months since Georgia recorded first COVID-19 case, and for all these 9 months, most of media outlets find it very hard to get answers from the government because the government briefings are almost the only source of information. Briefings are usually informative, but they just provide general information with statistics, but they never go deep into the specific issues. The National Center for the Disease Control, which is a main body which manages COVID-19 in Georgia, doesn't communicate well with media, and both government and medical officials usually favor certain TV channels to give interviews, and usually those are just one or two TV channels that they would usually talk to. The rest of the media outlets practically do not have an option to ask specific questions and to go deep into several important problems. It is also almost impossible for us or other media to appoint interviews with the major health officials. A lot of colleagues actually are telling me that they have the same problem with the government and health officials, that they are completely ignoring them while they just choose to speak with certain media outlets. And PR services are almost never helpful. The two main infectionists, which are Nikuradze and Mariam, reject all online media outlets to give interviews, but they gave interviews to a couple of TV channels. So there is a huge communication gap between the officials and media during COVID-19 in Georgia. I wanted to specifically talk about Marneuli, which is a municipality with ethnic Azerbaijani population. Marneuli was one of the first cities where the lockdown was announced, and Radio Marneuli was practically the only one unbiased media outlet which was working there. And they had all these challenges that I'm going to talk about. They were the first who faced these challenges, including the receiving public information, getting comments from the officials. Reporters of Radio Marneuli had problems receiving comments from local hospitals and, of course, the city hall. They had the responsibility to report what was happening inside Marneuli when the other media outlets could not access it, and they had these difficulties during the reporting. Another problem for Marneuli is that a lot of residents have this language barrier. And in the beginning, when the virus, when the first case was recorded, the information was not translated into the minority languages. At some point, government translated the main COVID-19 website into Armenian and Azerbaijani, but they didn't do it in Russian. And in Georgia, there are a lot of people for whom Russian is the first language for communication, and they are the most vulnerable group to the disinformation. So that still remains as a problem. Yeah, and then there were some technical difficulties too. For example, when the government announced the state of emergency, they gave only 5 hours to the media outlets to register accreditation for their journalists to work during the curfew hours, and they never extended this term, and there were a lot of journalists and media outlets who didn't manage to get this accreditation, and government didn't allow them to do it. For us, we also had a very maybe unique challenge because none of our employees own a car, and taxis and public transportation was banned. And for these 3 months, it was practically impossible for us to go to long distance to report certain things. And I've heard some of our colleagues had the same problem. But now, when the curfew was announced for the second time for certain, like the biggest city of Georgia, government gave 2 days for the media outlets to register their staff and vehicles for the accreditation, which was much better, and it was an improvement actually. Then I want to talk about the election campaign. As you know, we had the first round of parliamentary election on the 31st of October. Election campaign this year compared to the previous election was obviously slower because of the COVID. A lot of parties avoided street protests, but they still took place. And then we are still having protests, post-election protests, and it's very difficult for the journalists to follow COVID security measures while reporting from the ground. It's impossible to keep the distance when the politicians are giving comments, and very often they are not wearing masks. Same with the crowd. If there are, let's say, scuffles with the police and you want to take photos, of course, you have to do it, and you cannot distance, and then people are not wearing masks or they are not wearing them properly. We had a case when one of the opposition leader who was addressing a big crowd and gave comments to the media, she was not wearing mask, and then she tested COVID positive. And I had my own example as well. On the election day, I was taking photos on different polling stations of the politicians casting their ballots, and I was on the polling station of Prime Minister Georgi Gacharia, who on the election day went to self-isolation, and then the next day he tested positive, and the National Disease Control Center told me that I was still considered as his contact person, so I had to self-isolate for 12 days. Even though he was wearing a mask, but there were a lot of journalists and a lot of people on his polling station, and it was dangerous for all of us. A very specific also problem for the journalists in Georgia, probably I assume in the whole Caucasus, was that, and still is that, it's almost impossible to speak with the doctors. They refuse to speak under their real names or even to remain anonymous because they are afraid to lose their jobs. And this is the hardest part for us while we are reporting stories on the COVID-19, because we know that the doctors work some crazy 32-hour shifts for low salaries, and the conditions are just insane, but a lot of them just don't go on the record. Then I guess we have to talk about the public awareness as well. Because as you know, with the COVID came a lot of misinformation and a lot of conspiracy theories, which also spread in Georgia. There was not many people believed into this 5G conspiracy theories. However, NDI and CRRC conducted a poll in June 2020 and asked questions to people about their beliefs about the origins of coronavirus and how did it spread. And according to the poll, I think half of the population thinks that the coronavirus was developed in lab. Specifically, 30% thinks that it was developed in laboratory and spread intentionally, while 22% believed it was made in laboratory and spread accidentally. Only 13% of Georgians say that coronavirus came about naturally, and about a third of the population is uncertain what was the origins of the virus. So this poll, as we see, suggests and it proves that the government did not do enough to inform the population about the virus properly. And as you know, Facebook is the main social media platform for Georgians, and so our approach to counter this disinformation / misinformation and fake news was to create Facebook groups. We partnered up with several good quality media outlets in the country who agreed to share this fact-checked quality information about coronavirus. Our own groups targeted Russian-speaking audiences and English language readers, while a lot of Georgian media outlets did the same, and they made these groups available in Georgian. And they were very popular in the beginning, so it worked really well, and they are actually still quite popular. And as you know, right now Georgia has a lot of confirmed cases daily, so we are struggling right now with COVID, even though we had a really nice start in the beginning. So as a recommendation, I would say, and as a sum up, I would say that the main problem for the journalists during the pandemic remains to be getting public information and this huge communication gap with the government and health officials. So this is something that I would like the government to address, to first of all, treat all the media outlets equally, no matter if it's TV channel or online media, and give comments when possible, and also give interviews, which are so important to dig into certain problems in depth. And also, I think the government should be paying more attention to raise public awareness about the COVID properly, and to make sure that the information reaches the entire population, including ethnic minority regions, and provide information in minority languages, which includes the Russian language. And the last recommendation, I guess, will be that politicians have to be more careful during the public gatherings and follow COVID-19 security measures themselves to minimize the risk of spreading the virus. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.